The Kevin Durant trade watch is over. With Durant heading to the Houston Rockets, what does this mean for the San Antonio Spurs going forward? So, per Shams Charania of ESPN, Durant is going to be traded to the Houston Rockets for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the 10th pick in the draft, and 5 second-round picks. So, what I want to look at is obviously this doesn't impact the Spurs weren't part of this trade. So, how does it impact the Spurs going forward? In terms of how can they upgrade their roster. So let's first look at the Spurs' roster with the current players under contract. There's 10 players returning next season. There's De'Aaron Fox, there's Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, and Victor Wembanyama. Then off the bench, the Spurs have Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, Julian Champagnie, Keldon Johnson, and Jeremy Sochan. So that's 10 players, expected to return at least under contract right now for next season. Now, we do know that the Spurs are going to be making some upgrades to the roster via the draft. So we do expect that on Wednesday, the day of the draft, that the Spurs have the second pick. So they're going to be drafting Dylan Harper, who is projected to be the second best prospect behind Cooper Flagg. So again, Dylan Harper will be joining the team. Then the Spurs have the 14th pick, and this is where it gets interesting. The Spurs have two choices here that they can make with the 14th pick. They can draft a player, or they can look to trade the pick with a player to try to make an upgrade to the roster. So let's just talk about some of these scenarios. So do they trade or make the pick? So let's first look at the trade angle. So Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo has mentioned that the Spurs have been trying to package the 14th pick with a player. In terms of my opinion, and I made a video about this past week, is the most gettable player I think for the 14th pick is Cam Johnson of the Brooklyn Nets. I think a deal like the 14th pick, a 2030 pick swap, and either Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes might be enough to get it done for the Nets, especially that I know that the Nets, as I mentioned last time, they there's been reporting that they want a top 10 pick for Cam. With the Rockets now sending the 10th pick to Phoenix is going to keep that pick. So that's out of the picture. There's still the question of Toronto. I know that pick's kind of been, in reporting that it might be available, the 9th pick for Toronto. But if not, maybe the Nets just settle on going for a full rebuild and looking to get, the 14th pick from the Spurs. And I do want to note, though, that the Nets have multiple first-round picks in this upcoming draft. So that could be a reason why they might say no. But again, I think in terms of gettable players for the 14th pick and a player under contract like Keldon Johnson or Harrison Barnes, I do think that Cam Johnson's the best fit and most gettable player for the Spurs here. Now, there are some players who might be gettable, but it's going to take not only the 14th pick, but also multiple first-round picks as well. So this is where you really have to try to price someone from a team that doesn't want to give up these players. These are players that I've mentioned in past videos, like Trey Murphy III of the Pelicans, Herb Jones of the Pelicans, Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz. And just stopping on Markkanen real quick, I do want to say, too, I don't even think that the 14th pick it might be enough with other picks from the Spurs. Maybe the Jazz want to do what I mentioned last time in a video, which is like Markkanen and number 5 to the Spurs for number 2. Obviously, we know the Spurs aren't looking to move the second pick. So, again, I don't think Markkanen's really available. There's that angle of going after Mark Williams from the Hornets. And again, if you want to get more in-depth knowledge or just my take on these players that I mentioned, you can check out the video called Free Agent and Trade Fits with Spurs, Bigs and Wings. Just a name who I didn't mention in that video, but I think, again, this player, it would take the 14th pick plus extra first-round picks to get this player. That's Walker Kessler of the Utah Jazz as well, if the Jazz do not sign him to a contract extension this coming summer. However, I do want to note that let's just say that the Spurs do move the 14th pick this coming week, or at least after free agency begins after the moratorium on July 6th. I do want to mention that players that would probably have to be in a trade just because of the size of their contracts are players like Keldon Johnson, who before June 30th, his contract is $19 million. After July 6th, it's $17.5 million. Harrison Barnes' contract before June 30th is $18 million. After July 6th, it's $19 million. And then Jeremy Sochan, before June 30th, his contract's $5.5 million. And then after July 6th, it's $7 million. So again, just in terms of if the Spurs are moving 14 with the player, these are probably one of these 3 players is probably going to be included in a trade, should a trade come about between either before June 30th or after July 6th when the NBA moratorium lifts. If the Spurs do keep the 14th pick and select someone in the draft, they have been linked in recent weeks to two players, two big men in the draft. There's Thomas Sorber out of Georgetown and Joan Beringer of Seta Vita Olympia. So they're both two defensive bigs. Going to definitely help in that area, which is an area of need for the Spurs. However, they're both very young, and so I would just say now that Sorber's a little bit more NBA ready on the offensive end. A good catcher in the short role, but able to create out of that area and play make there. Also score, near the rim. Whereas Beringer, he's very raw offensively, as I wrote in my scouting report on him. And so I'm not so sure that he's quite ready for the NBA level on the offensive end, though he can be a monster defensively in terms of blocking shots, his timing, his lateral movement. He has good fluidity in how he moves for a big. So again, if you want to read the full scouting reports on both players, they're both up over on the spotshot.com for both Sorber and Joan Beringer. So again, there's also wings in the draft. If the Spurs want to look there, but again, that's with the 14th pick. So, how much is the 14th pick going to be ready to contribute to a team that's aiming for the playoffs? Then after the draft, then there's going to be free agency, which begins. Negotiations can begin on June 30th. And players, though, new players to new teams cannot sign contracts until after July 6th when the NBA moratorium lifts. But, if it's a veteran minimum, they can sign that actually on July 1st. Anyway, so the Spurs are going to have two exceptions here that they can use to sign free agents. They're going to have what's called the non-tax mid-level exception, which is worth $14.1 million, and the biannual exception, which is worth $5.1 million. So these exceptions can be used to either sign a free agent outright or acquire a player in a trade. So in terms of wings, who it's going to probably cost most of that $14.1 million, there's a few players out here that I've looked at. There's Quentin Grimes, who is a restricted free agent. So again, if you send him an offer sheet and then Philly gets to hold up that offer sheet for 2 days before they make a decision, all reporting is that Philly does want him back. There's Nickeil Alexander-Walker of the Minnesota Timberwolves. There is Trent Jr. of the Milwaukee Bucks, and then Malik Beasley of the Detroit Pistons. So again, so those are some wings who are going to probably command the entirety of that $14.1 million. As far as bigs that are probably going to take up most of that $14.1 million, you're looking at Brook Lopez of the Bucks and also Clint Capela of the Hawks. Capela, he won't take the full $14.1 million, but I do think it's going to take anywhere from like $8 to $11 million. So pretty much most of that exception. So again, those are the options with the $14.1 million. Some players that fit there. However, one thing they could also do, the Spurs, with this $14.1 million is they could split it into like two players, $7 million each player. And then also they still have the $5.1 million of the biannual exception. So some players who aren't going to take, the full $14.1 million, maybe you could split it into two players, is some wings, again, mainly wings off the bench. Luke Kennard of the who is he on the Clippers? I think I forgot who he played. Anyway, Luke Kennard's there. Tim Hardaway Jr. of the Pistons, Garrison Matthews, I believe, of the Hawks, and then Sam Merrill of the Cleveland Cavaliers. So again, Luke Kennard's out. Those players are out there. Again, you can maybe sign one of those players for like $6 to $7 million, somewhere where you split the exception. Some bigs who aren't going to take the full $14 million are Luke Kornet of the Boston Celtics, Guerschon Yabusele of the Philadelphia 76ers, and then I would also say Al Horford. But I think as long as the Celtics can find a way to bring him back, I think that he will just end up staying in Boston. So I don't think of him as a very realistic target. But again, those two players, Kornet or Guerschon Yabusele, again, could probably be signed if you split part of those exceptions, the $14.1 million, or just give them the full $5.1 million biannual exception. I know that I've gotten some comments about Naz Reid and, specifically, but I also throw out Santi Aldama. So I don't think that Naz and Santi are in the Spurs' range just because they are both expected to command a salary over $20 million, which, like I said, the Spurs don't have any cap space. They're going to be the most they can offer is $14.1 million to either of these players. And then Reid, we don't even know if he's going to get to free agency because he does have a player option. And most of what I've seen is that he's probably going to end up extending with Minnesota. Aldama is a restricted free agent. So again, the Grizzlies can easily match an offer sheet. Plus, the Grizzlies do want to bring him back. And so again, because of the financial restrictions, I don't see the Spurs as being able to get either Naz Reid or Santi Aldama. I will say though, like, let's just say either player wanted out, they could try to talk to their teams, Minnesota and Memphis, and see if the Spurs and them could work out a sign and trade. But again, that's a lot of obstacles to get there. The final piece is I wanted to give my final reaction to the trade. So basically, what we've learned over the last few days, according to the reporting that's come out from people like Shams Charania, Jake Fisher, Mark Stein, Sam Amick of The Athletic, and John Gambadaro of the Arizona Sports Radio, who's very plugged into the Suns situation. So what we mainly learned here is that the Spurs weren't really close, based on all this reporting. I do want to say, though, we got confirmation from Kurt Goldsberry, about a week ago that the Suns did have the price tag high for the Spurs. They really wanted either Stephon Castle or the number 2 pick. And obviously we knew, the Spurs aren't going to give up Castle or the number 2 pick. So I am interested to see, were the Suns willing to come off of that in the negotiations with the Spurs? Were they okay with like Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes in the 14th pick? How much of that was real? Again, these are all conversations that are kind of happening between those front office that we're not privy to, getting that kind of access. But, that's my question for the Spurs is did the Suns ever really back off of that initial ask of either Castle or the 2nd pick? And then basically, if you look at, the reported package for the Spurs, which was Vassell, Barnes, and number 14 versus what the Rockets sent, which was Green, Brooks, number 10, and the 5 second-round picks. Of course, that package from Houston going to win the day there. And, and Phoenix definitely took that package, and, what front office wouldn't take that package. So again, I'm just more interested to see, what were the Spurs really offering, and, how much the Suns come down on their price tag when it came to negotiating with San Antonio. I do want to mention something that Shams mentioned this past week was that the Spurs, he did say that the reason why they weren't being aggressive right now or willing to like overpay for Durant was that they are holding on to a lot of their draft capital in case another star becomes available at some point. He cites the example of how like going into last season, De'Aaron Fox was on the Kings, then all of a sudden, boom, like in January, reports start to come out that Fox might want out of Sacramento, and then all of a sudden February gets here, the Spurs, are able to get Fox and without having to give up too much because of just the scenario they were in, the fact that Fox wanted to come to San Antonio. So again, those are just that's something to mention, is that who knows who the next star is that's available. And so maybe that's what the Spurs are waiting for. I will say that because of that, what Sham said about the Spurs kind of holding on to their draft capital, that's why I don't think they're going to go for a high-risk move this offseason, such as Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, or Lauri Markkanen, where you have to give up a lot of draft capital to get those players. Instead, more so look like a realistic move. Like I said, someone like a Cam Johnson is probably a little bit more gettable for San Antonio without having to sacrifice a lot of their future draft capital. So that's just my quick instant reaction to the Kevin Durant trade. Make sure to subscribe here on the Spotted Pod. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Have a great Sunday. Enjoy Game 7 of the NBA Finals.